My son stood beside his $50,000 electric vehicle, lecturing me about fiscal responsibility while the snow fell around us. He called it a lesson for my own good, claiming I spent too much on emotion rather than the future. He had absolutely no idea that the title to that shiny car and the roof over his head was sitting in my pocket, waiting for the right moment to ruin his perfect Christmas. My name is Eleanor Blake. I am 58 years old, a widow living in the quiet, snow-dusted town of Oak Ridge, Ohio. And tonight, I was trying very hard to remain invisible. I wrapped the aluminum foil tightly around the edges of my green bean casserole dish, the heat from the glass warming my hands against the biting December chill. This was the same dish I had made for every Christmas since my husband passed, a simple tradition that felt increasingly small as I walked up the driveway of my only son's house. Caleb, my 32-year-old boy, was not waiting at the door to greet me. He was standing in the center of the driveway, surrounded by a small crowd of neighbors and cousins, gesturing grandly toward the sleek, charcoal-grey electric vehicle parked like a trophy on the pavement. It was a stunning machine, the kind that whispered money and status, costing more than I used to make in 3 years of working double shifts. It's all about efficiency and long-term value, Caleb was saying, his voice carrying over the crisp air. I figured it was time to treat myself to something that reflects where I'm going. A neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, whistled low and clapped Caleb on the back. You really pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, son. A self-made man. Your daddy would be proud. I stood near the edge of the garage, pulling my worn wool coat tighter around my chest to block out the wind. I forced a smile, though it felt brittle. Nobody looked at me. Nobody mentioned the decade I spent working as a night nurse and a clerk, sometimes 18 hours a day, just to ensure Caleb never had to take out a student loan. They only saw the shiny metal and the young man in the designer sweater. Eleanor, you made it. I turned to see Marissa, Caleb's fiancée. She was beautiful, sharp, and ambitious, dressed in a silk gown that likely cost as much as my monthly heating bill. Behind her stood an older couple who radiated the kind of effortless wealth that comes from generations of city living. Mom, Dad, this is Eleanor, Marissa said, her tone polite but detached. Caleb's mother, her father, Mr. Cole, shook my hand with a grip that was firm but dismissive. His eyes swept over my sensible shoes and the casserole dish in my hands. Charming, he said, in a way that suggested the exact opposite. Caleb has told us so much about his humble beginnings. We moved inside, where the house was decorated with a minimalist, expensive aesthetic that made me afraid to touch anything. The tension did not truly settle in until we were seated for dinner, before the first course was served. Caleb stood up and tapped a spoon against his wine glass. Everyone, listen up, Caleb announced, flashing a charming grin that did not quite reach his eyes when he looked at me. This year, I am instituting a new rule. No gifts, especially from you. Mom. The room chuckled as if he were telling a joke, but I felt my face flush hot. I am serious, Caleb continued, leaning forward. I want to teach everyone about healthy financial boundaries. Mom, you have a habit of spending on emotion rather than the future. Buying little knickknacks or sweaters that nobody needs is just poor asset management. It is a waste. I froze, my hand clutching the napkin in my lap. The entire table turned to look at me. I felt like a child being scolded in front of the principal. He is absolutely right, Mrs. Cole chimed in, nodding approvingly at my son. It is so refreshing to see a young man who isn't afraid to teach his parents about money. That is true leadership. We have to stop this sentimental spending if we want to build generational wealth. Exactly, Caleb said, emboldened by their praise. I just want you to learn, Mum. You need to understand that every dollar you waste on a gift is a dollar lost from potential investment. Consider this my Christmas lesson to you. I just thought. I started, my voice trembling slightly, but I stopped myself. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, praising Caleb for his fiscal discipline. They looked at me with pity, the poor widow who just did not understand how the modern world worked. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing the corners of my mouth up into a rigid smile so I would not ruin the evening. Inside my head. However, the numbers were spinning. I thought of the $3,000 I had secretly transferred to his account 4 months ago when he hinted he was short on cash. I thought of the $5,000 the year before that. They praised him for teaching me about money, never suspecting that the very chair he sat on, the house we were eating in, and the car outside were supported by the silent, steady pillar of my bank account. The Christmas music played softly, joy to the world. But as I looked at my son basking in the adoration of his future in-laws, I felt something profound shifting inside me. It was not just hurt. It was the sound of a final, structural crack in the bridge between us. As the laughter regarding my financial incompetence died down around the table, I took a small sip of water and looked at my son. He had the same jawline as his father. Mark, seeing it, brought back a wave of memories that I usually kept locked behind a heavy steel door in my mind. The irony of being lectured on money by Mark's son was not lost on me, especially considering I had spent the first half of my life cleaning up the messes Mark left behind. I remembered the smell of antiseptic from my years as a night nurse. My hands were always dry and cracked from scrubbing, my eyes red from lack of sleep. When I eventually transitioned into human resources for a small logistics firm to be home more often for Caleb, Mark's family had been unimpressed. I recall my mother-in-law sitting in our cramped kitchen, sipping tea with her pinky out, telling me, "Well, at least it keeps you busy, Eleanor. It is not like it is a career, but it is nice for a woman to have a little pin money." They never understood that my pin money was the only thing keeping the lights on. Mark was a dreamer, which is a polite way of saying he was a gambler with no sense of odds. He despised the idea of a steady paycheck. He chased the big score constantly, quitting stable jobs to pour our savings into penny stocks or real estate schemes that never broke ground. He would sit Caleb on his knee when the boy was just 7 years old and whisper poison into his ear. "Don't you be like your mother, son," Mark would say, loud enough for me to hear while I folded laundry in the next room. "She plays it safe. She is scared to live. You are going to be a king. You are not going to be a clock puncher." When Mark died of a massive stroke the summer Caleb was starting college, he did not leave a legacy. He left a mountain of debt and a foreclosure notice. Caleb never knew. I did not have the heart to shatter his image of his hero father, to keep Caleb in that private university. I took on 2 extra freelance consulting gigs and rented out our basement to a quiet student, claiming I just wanted the company. I hid the overdue notices. I fielded the calls from debt collectors in the bathroom with the shower running so Caleb would not hear. But Caleb had internalized his father's disdain for my stability. He grew up believing that money came from bold moves and brilliance, not from the slow, grinding discipline of saving. I remembered a conversation from 3 years ago, right when Caleb was starting to make a name for himself in marketing. I had seen him purchase a designer watch on credit and gently suggested he build an emergency fund first. He had laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Mum, please. You have a scarcity mindset. You don't understand how leverage works. I am building a personal brand. Well, you just know how to get by." It hurt, but I stayed silent. I stayed silent when I heard him on the phone with his college friends, bragging about his new apartment. "Yeah, I did it all myself," he had said. "Built this life from scratch. Nobody handed me anything." I was standing right there, wiping down the counters, invisible. Then came Marissa. She was not malicious, but she was a product of a world I did not belong to. She spoke the language of wealth accumulation and asset optimization that Caleb adored. She looked at my simple life, my paid-off compact car, my small wardrobe, my lack of flashy jewelry, and confirmed what Caleb already suspected: I was a financial failure. Eleanor represents the old way of thinking. I once heard Marissa explain to Caleb when they thought I was out of earshot, "It is fear-based. We are growth-based." This disconnect bled into every holiday. Last year, I had spent weeks knitting a sweater for Caleb, choosing the finest wool I could afford. When he opened it, he gave a tight smile. "Thanks, Mom," he had said, tossing it onto the sofa where the dog later slept on it. "It is warm." 10 minutes later, he was practically vibrating with joy over a set of vintage whiskey glasses from a business partner. He held them up to the light, admiring the craftsmanship, while my sweater lay in a heap of crumpled wrapping paper. He valued the price tag, the label, the prestige. He never saw the hours of labor. He never saw the love. And as I sat at this Christmas dinner, watching him preen about his new car and his no-gifts policy, I realized he did not see me at all. He only saw the cautionary tale he had invented in his head. What Caleb and the Coles did not understand was that desperation is the most efficient teacher a person can have. 15 years ago, while I was drowning in the flood of debt Mark left behind, I discovered a talent I never knew I possessed. I sat at my kitchen table night after night, dissecting loan agreements and insurance policies until my eyes burned. I found loopholes. I negotiated settlements. I realized that the confusing language of finance was just another code, and I knew how to break it. "You have a terrifying eye for detail, Eleanor," my bankruptcy lawyer had told me after I corrected his math on a settlement offer. "Have you ever considered that you are in the wrong line of work?" He was the one who pushed me to take night classes in corporate finance and human resource management. He was the reason I applied for a job at a chaotic, failing startup called Thornbrook Quantix Solutions. At the time, it was just 6 panicked engineers in a rented office park. They were bleeding cash, trying to sell complex software as a one-time product. I was hired to handle payroll, but I ended up handling their survival. I remember walking into the CEO's office 6 months in. I was 43, wearing a thrift store blazer, trembling slightly as I placed a file on his desk. "We are going to be insolvent in 90 days, I had said, my voice quiet but steady. "Unless we stop selling the software and start leasing it. We need to pivot to a subscription model with tiered consulting services. I have drafted the projected revenue streams right here." That meeting saved the company. It also changed my life. We did not just survive, we thrived. Over the last decade and a half, Thornbrook Quantix Solutions grew into a silent giant in the industry. providing the back-end HR architecture for thousands of mid-sized businesses across the country. We never made headlines. We never chased fame. We just made money. Because I had accepted stock options in lieu of a raise during those lean early years. And because I continued to reinvest every bonus back into the company, I am now the second largest shareholder. I looked across the table at Caleb, who was currently swirling his wine and explaining the concept of compound interest to his father-in-law as if he had invented it. He had no idea. He did not know that the admin job he thought I still worked was actually a senior advisory role on the board. He did not know that my portfolio was not just a savings account, but a diverse collection of bonds, equities, and real estate that made his new agency salary look like pocket change. The biggest secret, however, was the roof over his head. When Caleb and Marissa moved into their charming craftsman bungalow 2 years ago, they bragged about finding a landlord who gave them an incredible deal on rent-to-own terms. Caleb told everyone he negotiated it. The truth was, I bought that house through a blind trust. I was the landlord. I set the rent at 40% below market value so he could feel successful, so he could save, so he could stand on his own 2 feet without drowning like his father did. I glanced out the window toward the driveway. My 10-year-old sedan was parked in the shadows behind Caleb's gleaming electric vehicle. I could buy 2 of his cars in cash right now and still have enough left over to pay for this entire catered dinner. But I chose the old sedan. I chose the modest clothes. I kept my wealth a secret because of Mark. I remembered how his eyes would light up whenever I brought home extra overtime pay, not with gratitude, but with a predatory gleam. He would see my hard work as funding for his next gamble. He made me feel like nothing I earned was ever mine. When he died, I made a vow to the silence in my empty house. Never again, I had whispered to the walls. Nobody will ever know what I have. Nobody will ever use my security as their stepping stone again. Caleb never asked about my work, so I never told him. To him, I was just Mom, the woman who filed papers, made casseroles, and apparently needed to be taught a lesson about money. He assumed my silence was ignorance. He was about to learn that silence is actually the sound of leverage waiting to be applied. 3 weeks before Christmas, my phone had buzzed with a video call request from Caleb. When I answered, his face was flushed with the kind of adrenaline I used to see on his father's face after a night at the casino. Mom, you are looking at the new strategic brand manager for Nexus Marketing. Caleb had practically shouted into the camera, adjusting his tie. They bumped me up. The signing bonus alone covers the down payment on the new EV. I told you big things were coming. I had smiled, offering my congratulations. But then his tone shifted. He leaned closer to the lens, his voice dropping to that patronizing register he reserved for me. Listen, Mum, with this new level of income, I want to set a new precedent. This Christmas, no gifts. Seriously, don't buy me anything. Keep your money for yourself. I want you to stop spending on things that don't matter and start thinking about your own stability. Just listen to me for once. Okay, I understand. Caleb, I had said, though the sting of his words lingered long after the screen went black. It was not just the request. It was the narrative he was spinning around it. I found out later from a mutual acquaintance what he was telling Marissa and the Coles. He wasn't saving me money. He was intervening. He told them he had to re-educate his mother on fiscal responsibility because he had grown up in a house with zero financial literacy. Then came the email from Marissa. The subject line read, Christmas Eve Logistics, Minimalist Theme. Dear Eleanor, it read, we are going for a high-end, minimalist vibe this year to align with Caleb's new promotion. We have hired a private catering service, so please do not feel the need to bring any heavy dishes or casseroles. We want the table to look clean and modern. Just bring yourself. It was a polite way of saying my cooking was too rustic, too working class for their new life. My finger hovered over the delete button. I almost typed a reply saying I had caught the flu and would stay home. It would have been easier. But then, a ghost from the past whispered in my ear. You always run away when it gets uncomfortable. Eleanor. Mark used to sneer when I refused to sign another loan application. You just hide. I put the phone down. Not this time. I said to the empty kitchen. That afternoon, I logged into my banking app. For the last 3 years, I had set up a recurring monthly transfer of $1,200 to an account Caleb used for his housing expenses. I had routed it through a Shell LLC, so it looked like a partial rent rebate or a tax adjustment. Caleb never questioned where the free money came from. He just spent it. With a single tap, I cancelled the standing order. If he wanted to lecture me on independence, I figured he should taste the genuine article. 2 days later, the real blow landed. I received a text from Sarah, an old friend who was now a VP of Human Resources at a rival firm. L. I saw Caleb's LinkedIn update about the promotion. She wrote, I hope he is okay. Did he tell you Nexus is restructuring? They cut the entire mid-level management tier yesterday. They are letting people resign voluntarily to save face. But he is out of a job. Honey. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He had lost his job. He had no income. Yet he had gone out and leased a $50,000 car to impress his in-laws. And he was currently lecturing me on how to manage money. He had not told me. He was going to walk into Christmas Eve, dazzle the Coles with lies, and use me as his prop, the foolish old woman who made him look smarter by comparison. I packed my green bean casserole anyway. It was heavy in my hands, a stubborn symbol of who I was. But as I walked out the door, I made sure I had something else in my purse. I checked my phone one last time. In a secure folder, I had saved PDF copies of the house deed showing my name, the mortgage payments I had secretly covered, and my stock certificate from Thornbrook Quantic Solutions. You want a lesson in finance? Caleb, I whispered, locking the front door behind me. Then class is in session. The moment I pulled my sedan up to the curb, the LED headlights of Caleb's new car blinded me. It was parked diagonally across the driveway, aggressive and gleaming under the porch lights, demanding to be looked at. I stepped out into the biting wind, holding my casserole dish with both hands. But Caleb did not come to help me. He was too busy. He had ushered the entire Cole family out onto the front lawn, his arms waving excitedly as he pointed out the aerodynamic rims and the autonomous driving sensors. It does 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, Caleb was saying, his voice loud and performative. But the real kicker is the battery efficiency. It is all about long-term savings. I walked up the path, passing right behind him. He looked right through me, his eyes fixed on Mr. Cole's reaction, desperate for approval. It was not until I reached the steps that he finally acknowledged me, and even then, it was an afterthought. Oh. Hi, Mom, he said, barely glancing over his shoulder. Just head inside. We are finishing up the tour. Inside. The house smelled of expensive pine candles and something roasted that I could not identify. Marissa met me in the hallway. She looked impeccable in a cream-colored dress, her hair pulled back in a severe, stylish bun. She guided me toward the living room where her parents were settling onto the white sofas. "Mom." "Dad." "This is Eleanor," Marissa said, her smile tight. She is such a sweet soul. A bit old-fashioned. You know she tries her best, even if she doesn't quite grasp the complexities of the modern economy. I felt the blood rise in my cheeks, but I nodded politely at Mr. and Mrs. Cole. They smiled at me with the kind of benevolence one reserves for a slow child or a well-meaning pet. Dinner was a masterclass in humiliation. The table was set with geometric plates and crystal glasses, the portions small and artistic. Mr. Cole leaned back, swirling his red wine, and looked at my son. "So, Caleb?" he asked. "What is your take on the current market volatility? I assume you are hedging your positions." Caleb sat up straighter, clearing his throat. I watched him recite lines he had clearly memorized from financial blogs earlier that day. "Absolutely, sir. I am moving heavily into tech ETFs and looking at sustainable energy futures. You have to be aggressive." "The problem with the older generation," he said, casting a quick, dismissive look in my direction, "is that they spend on emotion. They hold on to cash because they are scared, or they waste it on things that depreciate instantly." I felt a sudden, sharp pang of memory. Pang. "I remember one Christmas when you were 7, I said softly, trying to inject some warmth into the cold room. "You wanted that red bicycle so badly. I worked 3 extra shifts to get it, and the look on your face when you saw it under the tree." "Mum, stop." Caleb cut me off, holding up a hand. "See, that is exactly what I mean. You equate buying things with love. That bike was a depreciating asset. It was just plastic and metal. I don't want to repeat those financial mistakes." Marissa placed a hand on Caleb's arm, nodding in agreement. "We have discussed this a lot," she said, looking at me with cool detachment. "When we have children, we want to teach them value, not consumerism. We don't want them growing up with that scarcity mindset. We want them to understand wealth." I looked down at my plate. My appetite gone. "It is paying off." Caleb continued, his voice swelling with pride. "I mean, look at this house. I have already paid down 40% of the principal in just 2 years. And the car paid for it with my signing bonus. Cash. No debt. That is what discipline looks like." I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. Every word was a lie. He had not paid down the principal. I had. I was the one making the extra payments every quarter to shorten the loan term. And the car, I knew for a fact, he had financed it at a high interest rate because I had seen the credit inquiry hit the address we still shared on some old paperwork. "Outstanding," Mr. Cole boomed, raising his glass. "A self-made man. That is rare these days. Caleb, you didn't rely on handouts or family money. You built this. That is the kind of man I want leading this family." The table erupted in murmurs of agreement. Caleb beamed, soaking up the praise that belonged to the ghost of his father, or perhaps to the fantasy version of himself he had constructed. Then he turned his gaze on me, seriously. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting from boastful to condescending. "You should take some notes. Stop buying gifts for people who don't need them. Let me help you set up a high-yield savings account. You need to start building an emergency fund like a real adult." Something inside me snapped. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig stepping on a forest floor. But it was final. I looked at my son, this boy I had shielded from bankruptcy, from hunger, from the truth of his father's failures, and realized he was not confused. He was cruel. I placed my fork down on the table with a deliberate, soft clink. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence. I looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and realized that the time for protection was over. If I stayed silent now, I would not just be letting him lie to them. I would be letting him erase me. Like an adult, I repeated, my voice low and steady. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. I reached into my purse and felt the cool glass of my phone screen. It was time. The transition to the living room for gift exchange felt less like a holiday tradition and more like a coronation ceremony for my son. We gathered around the towering spruce tree, its lights blinking in a rhythmic, hypnotic pattern. Caleb leaned back in the oversized leather armchair, crossing his legs with an air of absolute authority. "Just a reminder," Caleb announced, his voice booming slightly too loud for the small gathering. "No gifts for me this year, especially from you. Mum, we are sticking to the rule. Strict adherence to the budget." He looked at me with a smirk, expecting me to produce a clumsily wrapped box containing a sweater or a gadget he would never use. He was waiting for the opportunity to sigh and lecture me again. "I followed your instructions perfectly." "Caleb," I said softly, my hands empty in my lap. "I did not buy you a single thing." Caleb's smile widened into something triumphant. "See, that is progress. Finally, listening to reason. However," I continued, my voice hardening just enough to cut through the ambient jazz music, "I did think we should review the budget you are so fond of." I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. With calm, deliberate movements, I opened my banking application. I navigated to the Transfers tab, zoomed in on the line item labelled Recurring Monthly Support, cancelled, and placed the phone in the exact centre of the coffee table, right next to a crystal bowl of pine cones. The screen shone brightly, displaying the figure $1,200. "Caleb?" I asked, my tone conversational, as if asking about the weather. "Do you remember the last time you paid your rent in full, without a transfer from this account hitting your balance first?" The room went quiet. Caleb chuckled nervously, shifting in his seat. "Mum, you are being dramatic. Put that away." You are embarrassing yourself." "I am asking a question," I said, locking eyes with him. "What is that?" Mr. Cole asked, leaning forward, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "What does that figure represent?" Marissa was staring at the phone screen, her lips parted slightly. That is the exact amount of our mortgage gap," she whispered, mostly to herself. I did not look away from my son. I swiped the screen to the next image in the folder. It was a high-resolution scan of the property deed and the mortgage agreement for the house we were currently sitting in. I pointed a manicured nail at the signature line at the bottom. "You told everyone you bought this house." "Caleb," I said. "But if you look closely at the legal language here, you will see that I am the primary borrower. You are merely the co-signer. The bank required my credit history and my assets to approve the loan because your debt-to-income ratio was too high." That is just paperwork," Caleb stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. "And for the past 2 years," I went on, ignoring his interruption, Whenever you told Marissa and the Coles that your agency was having payroll glitches or bonus delays, I was the one paying the principal and the interest to keep the bank from sending a foreclosure notice. I have covered 8 months of payments entirely on my own. Caleb shot up from his chair, his hands trembling. I told you not to meddle in my finances. You are trying to ruin this. You don't understand how these things work. His voice cracked on the last word, the smooth baritone of the successful executive shattering into the whine of a frightened child. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The mask had slipped. He had just admitted to the meddling, effectively admitting to the dependency. I picked up the phone again. "One last thing," I said. I opened the email from my friend in Human Resources. I did not read the whole thing. I just enlarged the paragraph that listed the names of the employees affected by the restructuring at Nexus Marketing. "This was sent to me yesterday," I said, turning the phone so Marissa could see it clearly. "It says here that the mid-level management team was dissolved. It says you were offered a choice between termination or voluntary resignation." I looked up at my son, who was now standing pale and motionless against the festive backdrop of the tree. "Caleb?" I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "When were you planning to tell your fiancé, or your investors here, that you are currently unemployed?" The jazz music from the Bluetooth speaker seemed to warp and distort in the air. The admiration that had been beaming from the Cole family faces only moments ago evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, dawn-breaking horror. They looked from the phone, to me, and finally to Caleb, as if seeing a stranger standing in their midst. Marissa turned toward Caleb, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the sleeve of his cashmere sweater. Her face had lost all its composed elegance, replaced by the raw panic of a woman watching her future dissolve. "Caleb?" She stammered, her voice thin. "Is it true? Are you out of work?" Caleb refused to look at her. He adjusted his cuff, his eyes darting around the room, landing anywhere but on the people staring at him. Look, it is a strategic realignment. The industry is shifting. I decided it was time to pivot. I did not get fired. Marissa, we just parted ways. I am currently consulting. Mr. Cole stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The jovial patriarch was gone, replaced by the cold, hard businessman, Caleb. "We were discussing the financing for the lake house next month. You told me your income was verified. Stable income is a prerequisite for that kind of loan. If you lied to the bank the way you lied to us—" "I didn't lie," Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. "I am handling it." "Handling it?" I interrupted, my voice calm but cutting through his panic. "Is that what you call it? Just like you handled the credit card limits last July." I turned to Mr. Cole. He called me at 2 a.m. because his card was declined at a client dinner. He was terrified. He cried on the phone, begging me to transfer $4,000 instantly so he wouldn't lose face. I did it. I did it again in October, when the car insurance lapsed. Mr. Cole looked at me, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "But, with all due respect, Mrs. Blake, where are you getting that kind of liquidity? You live? Well, you live quite modestly." I did not answer him with words immediately. I simply tapped the screen of my phone again, switching from the bank statement to my shareholder portfolio. I held it up for him to see. Thornbrook Quantic Solutions. I read aloud. I am a founding member and the second largest shareholder. I currently hold an 18% stake in the company. Marissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at me with wide, bewildered eyes. Thornbrook. Wait. We studied that case in business school. The HR platform pivot. That was you. You are E. Blake. I am. I said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the static of shifting power dynamics. Caleb looked at the phone, then at me, his face twisting into a sneer that was ugly to behold. The shame was mutating into anger, a defense mechanism I had seen his father use 1,000 times. So you are rich, Caleb spat, stepping toward me. You have been sitting on a gold mine this whole time. Then why? Why do you live like that? Why do you drive that piece of junk? Why do you let me worry about you? You act like a martyr just to make me feel guilty. If you have millions, why didn't you just give me the money instead of making me beg? Because I am not your father, I replied, my voice hard as steel. I do not spend money to look important. Caleb. I save money so that I never have to answer to anyone. I save so that I never have to be afraid. And I certainly do not save it so my son can pretend to be a king while living on a pauper's discipline. I took a step closer to him. He shrank back slightly. You wanted to teach everyone a lesson tonight, I said, gesturing to the silent room. You wanted to teach us about financial boundaries, about reality. Well, I think it is time I returned the favor. I am going to teach you a lesson right now, in front of the people you want to impress the most. Caleb looked around the room. He saw the horror on Marissa's face. He saw the cold judgment in Mr. Cole's eyes. He even noticed, for the first time, that two of his friends in the corner had their phones raised, the red recording lights blinking, broadcasting his humiliation to the world he tried so hard to conquer. His shoulders slumped, the arrogance draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. He was finally, truly alone. I stood there, feeling less like a mother and more like a bank auditor closing a failing branch. The room was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The facts were heavy enough to crush the air out of the room on their own. Effective the 1st of January, I said, looking directly at Caleb. All transfers from my accounts to yours will cease. The automatic deposits, the emergency cover for your credit cards, the insurance payments, all of it stops. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. Furthermore, I continued, my tone as crisp as a legal document, the lease agreement we signed for this house, the one where you pay a symbolic $800 a month, is hereby voided due to breach of trust. If you wish to remain in this property, you will sign a new lease at the current market rate for this neighborhood, which is roughly $3,200 a month. If you cannot afford that, you will have 30 days to vacate. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Marissa. She was looking at Caleb as if he were a stranger she had met at a bus stop. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was realizing that the financial security she thought she was marrying into the stable home, the equity, the lifestyle, was not a result of Caleb's brilliance. It was a castle built on the foundation of my checkbook. And regarding the car, I said, pointing toward the window where the charcoal grey vehicle sat. Since I am the guarantor on the loan, a fact you conveniently omitted when bragging to the neighbours, I have the right to protect my credit score. If a single payment is missed, or if I find out you have taken out a payday loan to cover it. I will contact the dealership and initiate a voluntary repossession order myself. You can't do that, Caleb whispered, his face draining of color. I can, I replied. And I will. If you want to keep that car as a symbol of your independence, then you must actually be independent. No more hidden transfers. No more lies about your employment status. Mr. Cole, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of shock and discomfort, slowly nodded. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes fixed on me with a new expression. It was not warmth, exactly, but it was respect. He recognized the language I was speaking. It was the language of risk management. She is right, son. Mr. Cole rumbled, his voice grave. Leverage is a dangerous tool if you don't respect the collateral. Your mother is mitigating her exposure. I would do the exact same thing. Caleb looked betrayed. But I softened my expression just a fraction. I was not doing this to hurt him. I was doing it to break the fever that had consumed him. However, I said, offering the only lifeline I had left, I am not abandoning you. If you are willing to look for work honestly, if you are willing to take a position that might be below your title but pays the bills, I will help you. I will review your resume. I will open my network at Thornbrook Quantics and make calls to people who trust my word. But I will only do that if you look me in the eye and tell me the truth from now on. Caleb's hands were shaking by his sides. He looked at the floor, then at me, his eyes wet with humiliation. Mum, he choked out, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and shame. Are you serious? You are doing this now, in front of Marissa, in front of her parents. Do you have any idea what you are doing to me? You are humiliating me on Christmas Eve. I am trying to save you from a lifetime of pretending. Caleb, I said gently, you think this is hard. Losing your reputation because you lied to a bank or an investor is hard. Losing your wife because she married a mirage is hard. Losing face tonight is painful. Yes. But losing face is much easier to fix than losing your character. The silence stretched out, thin and brittle. Marissa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She did not look at her parents. She walked over to Caleb and took him firmly by the elbow. We need to talk, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. In private. Now. She practically dragged him toward the guest bedroom down the hall. Caleb cast one last, desperate look at the table, but found no sympathy there. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving me alone with the Coles. I sat back down, smoothing the napkin over my lap. The food on my plate was cold. The festive music had stopped some time ago, leaving the room quiet. I looked at the Christmas tree in the corner, its lights blinking on and off, indifferent to the wreckage in the room. For 30 years, I had tried to protect Caleb from the cold wind of reality. I had sheltered him from his father's mistakes and my own struggles. I realized now that my protection had been his prison. Tonight, for the first time, I had opened the door and let the cold air in. It was freezing. Yes. But at least it was real. The voices behind the closed guest room door had been muffled, but the intensity was unmistakable. It sounded like the tearing of fabric, the sound of a life being ripped apart at the seams. When the door finally opened, Marissa stepped out first. Her eyes were red, her mascara smudged in a way that ruined the perfection she had strived for all evening. She did not look at her parents. She walked straight to me, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "I need to go," she said, her voice shaking. "I need time to think about everything." "But Eleanor," she paused, taking a ragged breath. "Thank you. Thank you for not letting him drag me into a marriage built on a foundation of sand." She left without another word. The front door clicked shut, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. A moment later, Caleb emerged. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The confident, chest-puffing executive who had lectured me on asset management was gone. In his place was a 32-year-old boy with slumped shoulders and hollow eyes. He did not look at the coals. He looked at me, pleadingly. "Mom," he croaked. Can we talk? Please. Just us. In the garage." I stood up and followed him. The garage was freezing. The air smelled of cold concrete and the faint, chemical scent of the new car's tires. The vehicle sat there under the fluorescent lights, gleaming and aggressive, a $50,000 monument to his insecurity. Caleb leaned against the hood, burying his face in his hands. "I knew." He whispered into his palms. "I knew weeks ago that the layoffs were coming. I saw the memos. I couldn't face it." He looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. "That is why I went so hard on you tonight. I thought if I could just act like the smartest person in the room, if I could fix your mistakes, then maybe mine wouldn't feel so real. It was like a drug. Mom, making you look small made me feel big enough to breathe." I stood near the door, wrapping my cardigan tighter around myself. "And my job?" I asked quietly. "Why did you never ask? Why did you let them think I was nothing?" Caleb flinched. He looked at the polished floor. "Because I was ashamed," he admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "When guys asked what you did, I didn't want to say she is a genius who saved a tech company. I wanted to say, I made it on my own. If you were just a secretary, then my success looked like a miracle. If you were successful, then I was just average, average," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You think being average is a sin because your father told you so. But Caleb, look where exceptional got him. Look where it got you tonight." I took a step closer, letting the anger I had held for decades finally surface. Not as fire, but as cold, hard truth. For 30 years, I let you believe you were the sun and I was just the gravity holding you in place. I said. I let Mark belittle me. I let you treat me like a cautionary tale. I laughed along when you made jokes about my PIN money while I was secretly paying your mortgage. I didn't stay silent because I was weak. Caleb, I stayed silent because I was waiting for you to grow up enough to hear the truth without shattering. Clearly, I waited too long. Caleb slid down the front of the car until he was sitting on the cold concrete, weeping openly now. I just wanted you to be proud. He sobbed, his voice cracking. I thought if I wasn't rich, if I wasn't a king, like Dad said, you would see me as a failure. I lied to cover the failure. And then I had to lie to cover the lie. And I couldn't stop. I don't need a millionaire son, I said, my voice softening just enough to let the mother in me bleed through the investor. I don't care about the agency. I don't care about this car. I have enough money to buy this entire neighborhood. Caleb? Do you think that makes me a better person? No. It just makes me safe. I crouched down, so I was eye level with him. The only thing I ever required of you was respect and honesty. You gave me neither. He wiped his nose on his sleeve, looking like a child again. I don't know how to fix this. Marissa is gone. The Coles hate me. I have no job. I have nothing. You have a choice, I said firmly. You can stay out here in the cold with your lies and your fancy car. And you can lose me. Really lose me this time. I will walk out that door, sell the house, and you will never see a dime or a dinner from me again. Caleb stopped breathing for a second, fear widening his eyes. Or, I continued, you can stand up. You can walk back into that living room. You can look Robert and Susan Cole in the eye, and you can apologize. Not a fake apology. You will own every single lie. You will strip yourself bare. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. Mum. I can't, he whispered. It will kill me. It won't kill you, I said, standing up and offering him my hand. It will kill the fake version of you, and that is the only way the real one gets to live. So, are you coming? Caleb looked at my hand. Then he looked at his reflection in the pristine bumper of the electric car, a distorted, twisted version of himself. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Slowly, painfully. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His grip was weak, shaking, but he held on. He pulled himself up, nodding once, surrendering to my lead for the first time in his adult life. Okay, he whispered. Okay, let's go. The walk back from the garage to the living room felt longer than the drive to the house had been. The festive party atmosphere had completely evaporated, leaving behind a thick, suffocating tension. The remaining guests sat in silence, their drinks untouched, while the Christmas tree twinkled obliviously in the corner. It felt less like a holiday gathering and more like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Caleb did not sit down. He stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped tightly in front of him to hide their trembling. He cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet room. I have something to say, Caleb began, his voice raspy and stripped of its usual polish. Everything I said tonight about financial independence, about teaching my mother a lesson, it was all a lie. I lost my job 3 weeks ago. The bonus I bragged about does not exist. The only reason I still have a roof over my head is because my mother has been secretly paying my bills while I pretended to be a self-made man. I bought the car to hide the fact that I felt like I was nothing without a title. He turned slowly to face me. The room held its breath. Mom, he said, his voice breaking as he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm sorry. I tried to teach you a lesson about money, but I forgot the lesson you actually taught me about character. I am sorry for trying to rewrite your life to make mine look better. I have been arrogant, and I have been ungrateful. Caleb bowed his head, unable to meet my gaze any longer. It was a gesture of total surrender. For a long moment, nobody moved. The Cole family, who thrived on stories of uninterrupted success and pedigree, stared at my son. They were witnessing something rare in their world, a man destroying his own ego to save his soul. I walked forward and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. I felt the tension in his muscles, the way he was bracing for a blow that wasn't coming. The lesson tonight was never about the car. Caleb, I said, my voice steady. It was not about the money or the gifts. The lesson is that you must never use your mother as a stepping stone to make yourself look taller. You do not get to stand on my back and tell the world you are flying. I turned to face Mr. and Mrs. Cole. I did not apologize for the scene. I stood my ground. I am a woman who learned finance because I was drowning in debt. I told them. I learned strength because I was left alone to raise a boy in a world that wanted to eat us alive. I am not perfect, and I am certainly not high society. But I will not sit silently while my son builds a life on lies. If he is going to be part of your family, he is going to enter it as an honest man, not a fraud. Mr. Cole sat motionless for a beat, processing the shift in the room. Then, slowly, he stood up. He walked past Caleb and extended his hand to me. I judged you incorrectly. Eleanor, he said, gripping my hand firmly. I apologize. He turned to Caleb, his expression stern but no longer dismissive. If you want to marry my daughter and carry my family name, you had better start acting a lot more like your mother and a lot less like the fiction you invented. A collective breath seemed to release from the room. Marissa, who had been standing by the hallway arch, walked over to us. She looked shaken, her perfect life plan fractured, but her eyes were clear. She took my free hand. I don't know what happens next, she said softly to Caleb, then turned to me. But if we are going to try to make this work, Eleanor, I want you to teach me. I want to know how to control my money the way you do. I am tired of just looking rich. I want to be safe. From the mantelpiece, the old grandfather clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3, counting all the way to 12. It was officially Christmas. I looked at the tree, then at my son, who was wiping his eyes but standing straighter than he had in years. The shame was still there, burning hot, but the lies were gone. I realized then that the Christmas lesson Caleb had planned had indeed been delivered, just not the way he intended. He hadn't taught me anything. I had taught him. I had taught him that the truth is the only currency that doesn't depreciate, and for the first time in my life, I hadn't stayed in the shadows to let him shine. I had stepped into the light. And in doing so, I had finally given him the chance to become a real man. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you folks are tuning in from. So please drop your city or state in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get heard by even more people.